Every week, a lot happens in Parliament. Debates rage, bills are discussed, and laws are introduced. So it's easy to feel like you don't quite know what's going on in the chamber. So we're lifting the lid and telling you exactly what happened this week in Parliament. This week we saw the introduction of strict new COVID rules about travel, a 10-minute rule motion on the outlawing of SA mills, and another update on the Genocide Amendment. In the first story this week, we discussed some new rules implemented by the Health and Social Care Secretary on Monday. It should be no surprise that the government are keen to try and stop the spread of new variants of coronavirus in the UK. While the Kent variant is already established in the population, ministers are keen to stop other variants, such as the South African one, becoming more widespread. Scientists have claimed that evidence so far has suggested that the Oxford vaccine provides minimal protection against the South African variants. And as the Oxford vaccine is the most purchased vaccine by the UK government, and one of the very few that's been clinically approved in the UK, it would be particularly bad if the South African variant becomes the dominant strain in Britain. Hence why ministers have decided to act now to try and stop this from happening. The specific rule change that Mr. Hancock announced on Tuesday were as follows.
The three parts are as follows. First, Mr. Speaker, we're setting up a new system of hotel quarantine for UK and Irish residents who've been in red list countries in the last 10 days. This means that any returning residents will have to quarantine in an assigned hotel room for 10 days from the time of arrival. Second, Mr. Speaker, we're strengthening testing. All passengers are already required to take a pre-departure test. From Monday, all international arrivals will be required by law to take further PCR tests on day 2 and day 8 of that quarantine. Third, Mr. Speaker, we'll be backing this new system with strong enforcement of both home quarantine and hotel quarantine. We're also coming down hard on people who provide false information. Anyone who lies on the passenger locator form will face a prison sentence of up to 10 years.
It's this third element that's caused a lot of controversy. A 10-year prison sentence for lying on a form seems to some excessive. Lord Sumption, a former justice in the UK Supreme Court, is one of those who believes the punishment is excessive. He stated that lower maximum penalties exist for even sex offences involving minors. In fact, he's posed a question to the Health and Social Care Secretary. Does Mr. Hancock really think that non-disclosure of a visit to Portugal is worse than large number of violent firearms offences or sexual offences involving minors, for which the maximum is 7 years? Even the former Attorney General Dominic Grieve said that the rule was exaggerated and entirely disproportionate. Despite this criticism, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps defended the new rules, claiming the British public would expect pretty strong action due to the seriousness of the crime. Although the Prime Minister has backed the measured and proportionate hotel quarantine plans at PMQs, he made no reference to the incredibly severe punishment levied against those who lie on passenger locator forms. So we'll have to see how this shakes out in the weeks ahead, and if Johnson makes an official comment. Let's be honest, a series where we run down parliamentary discussion and debate is unlikely to ever land on the trending page. We can see from the viewing figures that this isn't one of our most popular series, but we truly believe that it's important that the public sees what our representatives are doing and discussing. And when much of the media is chasing clicks with pointless stories, we want to stand out, shining a light on what's truly important. We're only able to do this because of our Patreon backers, who donate to the channel each month. Their funding means that we don't need investment from big business interests or to lean on clickbait. If you too want to support us, then you can head over to our Patreon and donate as little as $3 a month. In addition to all of the standard perks for backing us though, this month everyone who's donating $10 or more gets an exclusive golden pin badge completely free. The link to support us on Patreon is in the description. In the second story today, we look at something called a 10-minute rule motion. This is something we've discussed previously in the daily briefing, so if you want a more comprehensive explanation of what 10-minute rule motions are, then check out that video. Very briefly though, they're a way for backbenchers to make a quick pitch to their peers about any type of bill they want. As they're a way for backbenchers to propose bills, they're usually about things the government has not considered or would not likely be able to put on the priority list. The motion we're looking at today fulfills this criteria. It's about the banning of essay mills, websites where students can pay to have essays written for them. Here's what the motion's proposer, Chris Skidmore, has said about it.
Companies that encourage students, researchers, and even school pupils to part with money in return for work can be passed off as their own should have no place in a modern society. For each week that passes during the COVID pandemic, the situation is only growing worse. As students that have been forced to study remotely from home, away from campus, on welfare and support, taking their studies and exams online, increasingly owe prey to essay mills whose number has increased dramatically. The QAA have revealed today that there are at least 932 sites in operation in the UK, up from 635 back in June 2018.
Mr. Skidmore outlined what they do and exactly what the issue is with them. He then moves on to explain exactly how widespread this practice is becoming and how exploitative they are.
I heard of stories of students now being recruited on campus as influencers, being paid to leaflet student halls, tales of students being blackmailed by these companies with threats of being reported to their universities or employers.
He also explains the people actually writing the essays are often from some of the poorest countries, being paid $1 an hour and working 12-hour shifts. He also explains how exploitative these websites are for recent graduates in this country.
Exploitation of graduates and students at home, so desperate for extra money that they're selling their essays for £10, which in turn will be sold on for £300.
One of the really interesting points that he made was exactly about who would be criminalised for such practices.
I wish to make clear that my bill would not seek to criminalise students themselves for using essay mills. Instead, I propose that universities need to look at new strategies for creating second chances. I believe that while we need to be tough on contract cheating, we must also be tough on the causes of contract cheating, which would not exist if there were not a market for them to exploit.
As we explained last week, these types of motions usually pass, but if the government doesn't like them, they just won't get scheduled for future debate. An oral vote did take place to see whether this bill should progress, and as you can see, there's not a huge number of MPs partaking in this vote.
The question is that the Right Honourable Member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Ultimately, we'll have to see whether the government schedules a discussion on this again, or if, as usual, the debate dies here. For the third story today, we have yet another instalment of the controversy surrounding the Genocide Amendment to the government's trade bill. In past editions of This Week in Parliament, we've looked at how numerous backbench Conservative MPs have rebelled against their government in favour of an amendment which would allow UK courts to label countries as having committed genocide, and therefore require the government to take a look at any trade deals with the country. The original rebellion nearly succeeded, but it failed, and so a similar but watered down version of the amendment was sent down from the Lords, this time still giving UK courts power, but a genocide ruling only requiring a parliamentary debate, not governmental reconsideration. Well, this week the watered down version of the amendment arrived in the Commons, and there was set to be another big rebellion against the government, possibly being successful enough to put the amendment into law. However, the government, which doesn't want to give the courts the power to tell Parliament what to do, used a quirk in the system which allows it to group together amendments. It grouped this amendment together with another championed by the opposition Labour Party, with the hope that it would force Tory MPs to back down and not support the new bundle of amendments. Ultimately, this tactic worked, as Tory rebels decided they couldn't support the combined amendment. Greg Hands, the Trade Minister, instead proposed a different amendment.
It proposes that a relevant Select Committee publishes a report stating there is credible reports of genocide occurring in the territory of a state, with which we propose a bilateral FTA, then the government has a duty to act. First, we will respond in writing, setting out the government position. Then, if the committee is dissatisfied with this, the government will make time for a debate and vote in the House of Commons on a substantive motion.
There was outcry over what Emily Thornberry called shameful, shabby and shifty behaviour from the government in grouping the amendments, as well as disappointment at the government's insistence in not using the courts. One particular Conservative rebel summed up the frustration well.
I'm appalled at the parliamentary games played over such a grave issue, but we won't let the principle go away. We will do everything we can to make sure that we are not trading with genocidal states. Remember, it's not mine, but the government's position that genocide is for the courts. The Foreign Secretary last month said whether or not it amounts to genocide is a matter for the court. The Prime Minister last month said the attribution of genocide is a judicial matter. Why then back a meaningless amendment that demotes this to a select committee which has been rejected by select committee? And if you look at the details of that amendment, it deliberately excludes the Uyghur and China. So at the moment, we're outsourcing genocide determination to the UN, which is handcuffed by China and Russia. Why not bring that back home? Why not take back control in line with government's own policy?
This issue is, and I feel like I've been saying this for ages now, not done yet, so you can expect to hear more about it soon. If you want to be updated with what happens in Parliament next week, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. Or if you prefer to listen to the weekly update, then subscribe to the Daily Briefing podcast feed, where you'll find a daily summary of the week's news events and every Saturday, This Week in Parliament.